Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and I've got an absolute must-see game here. If you've got the time to watch it all the way through to the end if you can, but if not, and you're time poor and you've got something to do, then you can just skip forward to the main part. I've put it in the timestamp in the description. And this is a game between Botvinnik and Portisch. It was played back in 1968. Botvinnik was a back-to-back world chess champion in the post-World War II era up to the early 60s, and Portisch was a Hungarian grandmaster in the top 10 throughout the 1970s, so both very strong players. And also wanted to say quite quickly too, thank you to all the subscribers. I'm pretty blown away, to be honest, because I was, a couple of weeks ago I only had 0 and now I've got 70. It's crazy, so thank you so much. And here's a quick shout out as well to some of the guys leaving positive comments. Thank you guys, really do appreciate it. And let's get back to the game. So you can see here, after white castles kingside, we have an accelerated dragon reversed. So normally black would have this position in the Sicilian, but white has an extra tempo now by virtue of the fact he is white. And it's accelerated because white can play d2 to d4 in one go. In the usual unaccelerated version, black, or white in this case, has already played d3, which means a d3, d4 break takes 2 turns. So because of that, white could play d4 next move, hypothetically. So black plays knight b6, which means that d4 now isn't possible because the queen is backing up d4, whereas before it wasn't. So after that, we have d3 now, and these sorts of games become a little bit more relevant because the bishop's backing up the knight here, which attacks this bishop. And you'll see this is quite common because black's dream would be to play something like queen d7, bishop h3, swap this off, and get rid of this key piece in the accelerated dragon position, which is the fianchetto bishop. And this sort of stuff, you'll notice, is quite common in trying to achieve that protection of this bishop. The issue here is that after bishop e7, this isn't possible anymore. But, it's just a regular move, and it also allows black to castle as well. White plays a3 with the idea of playing b4, b5, kicking this knight, putting more pressure on the queen side, but black just stamps it out with a5. And the idea is that, yes, it does stop b4, but white has got something from this in exchange, and that is a little bit more control of this b5 square, because now you can see if a piece was here on the b5 square, there's nothing here that can really kick it. You'd have to use this pawn, but you can see this is being blocked at the moment by the knight. So it does stop b4, but it does weaken b5 at the same time. So not as straightforward as it looks. Now after bishop e3, just putting more pressure on the queen side, I thought it was also important to note that if the knight was here, you'd see stuff like this, because this would look a little bit more awkward. But with the knight over here, this is the best square for the bishop, I think, on e3. And black just castles kingside now. So here there are 2 moves. I thought I'd show you the first one, which is rook c1. What happened in the game was knight a4. But first I thought I'd show you rook c1 because this was actually recently played between Giri and Carlsen. Carlsen, who had the black pieces. I just wanted to show you why rook c1 isn't so great. And this is because Carlsen absolutely wiped the floor with Giri after a4. And totally cramps white's queenside there. And it's not so easy to remedy. And in the game, Giri played knight d2, Carlsen played f5, and then Giri tried to grab this pawn here after bishop takes, b takes, and knight takes a4, because the knight here was protecting the a4 pawn, and white just thought he'd get rid of it and then grab the pawn. The difficulty is that this this queen ends up getting overworked because bishop g5 threatens captures, and then the knight here would hang. So Giri brought his knight back, but then Carlsen just played e4, and you can't take this because, again, you're losing a knight because of this bishop. So I thought that was just important to point out that it's not so easy to actually gang up on this a4 pawn if you allow it to get there. So because of that, you don't want to allow black to play a4 himself, basically. So by playing knight a4, which is what happened in the game with Botvinnik, you prevent that from happening. It's not so easy to solve, basically, if you're white. And quite surprisingly, Portisch took, he could have just played knight d5, which would have been okay, but you would have seen something like this, for instance, and would have been pretty okay for black. But for whatever reason, he decided to take here instead, which meant that after queen takes a4, this white queen's very active now, and it can come to this b5 square that I was mentioning before and put a lot of pressure on the queen side. So black has to be careful here. It's not so easy for him. Although it looks relatively equal, white does have a lot of pressure on the queen side here, and he's got this open c-file that he can exploit. Black plays bishop d5 now, and the idea is to just counteract the influence of this bishop on g2. Botvinnik goes ahead with rook fc1, and black has a plan here. His plan is to get c6 in somehow, because if he can get c6 in, it bluntens this file, it bluntens this bishop here, and it also protects b5, which keeps the queen out of b5. The difficulty is that if this knight is absent from c6, then this pawn's going to hang, right? Because the knight will just come here and scoop it up. So black first has to go through a series of moves in order to protect the e5 pawn. So black goes ahead with rook e8 first, and the idea is that he wants to play bishop back and then protect the pawn with his rook. Botvinnik just plays rook c2 and trying to double. Now you may be wondering, if white played queen b5, would that be good? Well, not exactly, because if you do try to clean up this pawn here, black does have a very cheeky knight d4, which would unleash a discovered attack on the queen, and then you'd basically be in trouble here. And you've also got knight takes e2. I think that queen's trapped, actually. Well, you'd have something like this, and then you'd lose the rook. So because of that, queen takes b7 actually isn't possible. So instead of going ahead with queen b5, Botvinnik just plays rook c2, and black goes ahead with his plan bishop f8, now protecting e5, and then we see the rook's double on the c-file. Now here is where the game gets pretty funny, because both players see the same thing, but Botvinnik has seen deeper, and that's after knight b8, which looks strange, but remember, Portisch wants to play c6, and he has to move the knight. And the idea that Portisch had is that if rook takes c7, bishop c6 would simultaneously cut this rook off and attack the queen at the same time. And Botvinnik, seeing this, played rook takes c7 anyway, and this is why it's so funny, because Portisch played bishop c6, and he was quite confused, thinking, hey, aren't I just ahead here now? Like, what's the deal? But this is where I want you to pause and have a think about what Botvinnik did. There's a couple of moves here which are insane, and this is why this game is featured on the channel, so have a think about what Botvinnik did. Okay, so the first thing Botvinnik does is he gives up the exchange with rook takes. Rook 1 takes c6. And, okay, if you take with the knight, white will just clean up this pawn. He's got two pawns and the bishop for the rook. Have two very active bishops, bishop pair, and a lot of activity. So instead of allowing that to happen, black took with the pawn instead. But it's here where I want you to pause again, have a think about what Botvinnik's next move was. Botvinnik played rook takes f7, double exclam. And you can see now that the logic behind giving up the first rook for the light square bishop is that it weakens all the light squares in the black camp. And this move, again, weakens even more light squares in the black camp. And if you take this rook, you get into a lot of trouble after queen c4 check, king g6, queen g4 check, and you'll end up getting either mated or losing your queen. Because if you don't take this knight and you try to run away, you're going to get checkmated in the corner here with king h8, knight f7 check, king g8, knight h6 double check, king h8, and then queen g8 mate. It's all over. So because of that, you can't actually take this rook at all. So black plays h6 in order to prevent knight g5. But after that, white just brings his rook over. You know, it did its job. It's weakened this diagonal. And there's not a lot black can do now because he's lost his light square bishop. He's completely lost on the light squares. And black tries to do something by putting his queen on the light square, also attacking this rook. But white just goes ahead, queen c4 check. I thought it's important to note that if you play queen e6, white would just pick up this pawn, and you know, you can't take that, of course, because your king would be in check. And if you allow this to happen, then white's got 3 pawns in the piece for the rook, and very active. You'd lose this game for sure. So queen e6 isn't an option at all, really. Well, nothing's an option at this stage. So black just played king h8. But now another great move. I'll let you pause if you can see what it is. Okay, so Botvinnik just gives up the rook with knight h4. And just further exploiting the weaknesses here on the light squares. Now, it's important to realize as black, you cannot defend yourself on the light squares. You're just helpless. So Portisch just goes ahead and grabs the rook, because why not? I mean, what else is he going to do? And then after knight g6 check, king's forced to come up. Now bishop e4, and you can see the power of this bishop now. Discovered checks everywhere, including knight takes bishop, which would be double check as well. So the bishop comes to d6, but Botvinnik's just up on cleanup duty here with knight takes e5. After g6, bishop takes g6, king g7. You can pause again, figure out what the fatal blow here was by Botvinnik. Okay, Botvinnik finished the game with bishop takes h6, and it's all over. This is where Portisch resigned. The idea is that if you capture, there's a check here, another check here, and guess what? Your queen's on the loose here. So after king f6, little finesse here with knight g4 check, you lose your queen, and you're up a whole stack of pawns, plus both of these rooks are hanging. So that's it, guys. Please subscribe if you're into chess. I hope to see you next time. I'm going to be going through more crazy games like this that we can hopefully learn a lot together on. And I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much. Until next time, see you. Bye.